Welcome to the Chase Challenge Week 7. So this week we are in the middle of God fulfilling his promises to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the children of Israel. He's preparing them and making them into a nation. He is bringing them to a land that he's promised to give them for centuries. And he wants to use them to be a blessing to the whole world, every nation of the whole world. Now, when is that going to happen? How is that going to happen? What does that look like? The Israelites don't know, but they do know that their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, have been given these promises. God has now shown up 400 years later to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he's introducing himself as Yahweh. So the Israelites know that they are being pursued by God. God is chasing after them for a purpose. He wants to bless them. He wants to know them, and he wants them to know him. And he wants to use them. He has a purpose for them here on this earth. He wants to use them to bless all the nations of the earth. So this is what the Israelites know. They've just come out of Egypt and they've seen God do some amazing and powerful things that they would have never seen or known had Pharaoh just given in to Moses' demands right away. But because Pharaoh kept saying no and refusing Moses' request to let the Israelites go into the wilderness to worship the Lord, God was able to show his mighty and awesome power that would help the Israelites to know him and hopefully learn that they can trust this God. And he is a God that is powerful, who is able to truly rescue them. So God is in the middle of fulfilling his promises to the Israelites, and he's forming them into a nation. And to help form them into a nation and bring them into this cohesive people group before they enter the land that he wants to give them, he gives them the law. And Moses last week is up on the top of Mount Sinai, and that's where God gives him the 10 Commandments written on a tablet. Not only does he give him the 10 Commandments, but he gives him very specific instructions for building the tabernacle. And the reason why God is giving them these instructions is to not only help form them as a nation, but he desperately wants to meet with them. He desperately wants to dwell among them, to be able to speak with them and interact with them. Because way back, if we rewind all the way back to week 1, we remember that that's the awesome relationship that God had with his people, his creation at the beginning of time. With Adam and Eve, God walked with them in the Garden of Eden, and it was a sweet, perfect fellowship that they enjoyed. And God desires this. He desires this now with the children of Israel. He wants to be their God. He wants them to be his people, and he wants to interact with them. He wants to have a relationship with them. But ever since week 1, when Adam and Eve chose to sin against God and choose their own way, that relationship had been broken. The relationship between God and humankind, his creation, had been broken. And it was almost impossible for a holy, perfect God to interact with a sinful human people. So God gives them the law. He gives them the 10 Commandments. He gives them very specific instructions for the tabernacle for the purpose of meeting with them, dwelling among them, having a relationship with them. Well, now this week, we're going to go into some of the details of what that looks like. We are going to face, 2 tragedies The first tragedy is that while Moses is still on top of Mount Sinai, getting those 10 commandments, these specific instructions from God, his brother Aaron is down with the Israelite people doing something that is absolutely in contradiction to what God is telling Moses not to do. And while these two things are happening simultaneously, just tragedy occurs. And I'm not going to tell you what that tragedy is, but Aaron, Moses' brother, does something that is tragic. I'm not going to give it away. You'll have to read it to find out. But the story doesn't end there. Moses intercedes. He appeals to God, and God declares himself as something that he declares himself through the whole Old Testament. He defines himself as not only Yahweh, but he defines himself as a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and rich in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations. And that's how he reveals himself to the Israelites. So we face one tragedy. Then God continues to give very detailed, specific instructions about the tabernacle. This is the place where they will meet with God. This is that special place. And it's inside the tabernacle, inside the very inner room where they can come before the presence of God. But this can't happen without a great deal of effort, time, cost, skill, intentionality, dedication, anything that you can think of, all of them. It would take all of them to prepare this amazing, glorious, beautiful place, this tabernacle where they could meet with him. And it would take a great deal of concentration and just heart, soul, and mind, body, possessions, sacrifice. It would take all of that in order for them to meet with God. So the Israelites would have to decide, as God is giving them these laws, all of these very specific instructions, the Israelites would have to decide, is he worth it? Do we want him bad enough to do all this? Do we desire him and his presence more than we desire everything he's requiring of us right now? Because God's requiring a lot. And as you read through some of these ceremonial laws, some of these laws that deal with the sacrifice that would be required before they could be in God's presence, before God's Spirit could come and descend upon the tabernacle and they could meet together with him, it would require a lot from them. You might be worried about just trying to read through this. Well, they had to actually do it. They had to read it. They had to understand it. They had to be intent about making sure they were doing everything exactly the way God had told them to do it. Because if not, God knew what would happen. In fact, in another part of your reading this week, you will come across a place where it says, be careful to do everything you are commanded to do so that you will not die. The cost for not doing everything exactly the way that God lined out for them would come at a very high cost. And you will see towards the end of this week's reading a second tragedy, a very serious tragedy that occurred maybe unintentionally, maybe not purposefully, maybe not even out of a heart that was rebellious or just wanted to do things their own way, but God's laws weren't followed. He gave really specific instructions, and something very tragic happens as a result. So as you're reading this week, I want you to ask yourself these questions. What is required for the Israelites to have a relationship with God? What incurs guilt? What makes a person guilty? As you're reading through this week, what makes them guilty? What creates this chasm between them and God? Is it because of what they're aware of, what they know, or could it be even things that they're not aware of, unintentional things, things that they don't know? What makes them guilty? How can they be forgiven? What is required in order to make atonement? And how does confession play into it? And restitution. We are beginning this week to be introduced to the ceremonial laws, the laws that will help Israel connect with God, the God who loves them, who is pursuing them, who has been chasing them. And the Israelites have to decide, is he worth chasing? Is he worth listening to? Is he worth delving into all of these instructions to see what he requires? And are we going to put the time, effort, cost, sacrifice, intentionality into doing what he says? Here's another question for you. This tabernacle is going to require a great deal of skill and ability. It's going to require some talent. How does God provide that? And who does he provide that through? Finally, what role does the priest play in the service of the tabernacle and in his role between God and the people? I hope you delve into this week's reading with effort, intentionality, expectation, and diligence. Remember, God is chasing after you. And just like the Israelites, you need to decide, is he worth chasing after? I'll see you next week.